Hi everyone. This week we are going to have coverage from week 4 of the US Chess League 2014. It's a matchup between the Los Angeles 5 and our Arizona Scorpions. And once again, the Scorpions play to a tie with 4 decisive games. I'm going to cover one in detail today, and that is the game between Melikset Kahachian versus Mackenzie Molnar. It's a very informative game. But before I do that, I want to go through the other games real quickly, just fragments of them. First of all, I'm not going to cover Amanda's game because she just had a bad opening and everything went downhill from there. There's no point in covering that. She was just out of form. What we're looking at here is the game between Nikki Korba, who's playing white, would be at the top of the board, and Pedram Atufi is playing black. And here, Nikki is actually in quite a bit of trouble. He played knight to b7 here. Now, I don't know if it was time pressure or what was going on. I was a little preoccupied the night that these games were going on, so I didn't get to watch. Nikki had just played knight to b7, and it's very clear to see that queen to b4 check here would be decisive. Because if he goes king to c6, rook to c8 check is going to force white to give up the queen. Because if he goes to d5, then queen takes c4 is going to be checkmate. And going back, if he goes to a6, rook to a8 is the same thing. White's going to have to interpose with the queen and lose the game easily. But for some reason, and it's either a mouse slip or time pressure got the better of him, I don't know. Pedram played king takes e6, which is a horrible mistake. He just drops his queen. And queen takes d6 check, and he realized what he did, and he resigned. Okay, so those are our 2 losses, was Amanda Mateer and Pedram losing this one. Now, this game here is the game between Mark Ginsburg and Larry Remliner. And let's get to a good position here. Yeah, right here is a critical position. White's definitely clearly for choice here. And black now plays, he should play a3 here, but white's still winning. But he played rook to g8, which is just absolutely lost here. Now I wanted to show you this position in case you want to set it up on your board at home and give it a little study here. White has a very nice way to win the game almost immediately. It's not that it's going to be making a couple moves. It is that black is going to be left without any good replies whatsoever. In this position, Mark played rook to h3, which is still winning. But if you want to pause the video, see if you can come up with a better move than what Mark played. This is certainly worth looking at in greater detail, but e6 is absolutely crushing. The knight on c7 is hit, so something has to be done. And if he tries to just say, okay, well, I'm going down a knight with a b3, then we can take on f7, rook moves, bishop takes c7, rook c8, rook d to g1, and it just gets murderous at this point. I won't go through all the variations here to save time, but you can look at this and you can see that white is just clearly winning here. And if he tries to defend by taking with the knight, which is in reality the best shot, well, this is just falling short. B takes a4 now, and white is up a piece for a pawn. He can win a very prosaic endgame there. But rook h3 was played, and now we're going to go ahead and go through this really quick here because we get to a very interesting position here later on. Now, in this position, it's at move 39, and I'm sure the players are both getting a bit shorter time here, and black played knight to a2, and now Mark took on b5, which is fine, but there was a better move here. Rook to g1 check. And now black is at a crossroads. What does he do? If he goes king to f8, we go bishop h7, and then we're going to trade rooks into a very simple winning endgame, like so. And if he brings the king to h8, then we have rook to a1. And when the knight moves, we play rook to a8. And there's really no way to stop that d-pawn from coming up. Okay, so one little point missed. And then we're going to jump on way down further in the game where White's just got a winning endgame. He's ready to promote. and here he gets a little careless. Now the move he should play here is king to d4. This was not played in the game, but let's take a quick look at this. What can black do here? If he goes b2, then you simply check. And now if he goes king to c6, knight to d8 is checkmate. No escape for the king. And if he goes to a6, well, then simply rook takes pawn, and you got a winning endgame here. And after king d4, if he goes rook to h8, we'll go rook to c8, rook to h1, queen, rook check, king moves, rook takes queen, rook takes b2, and this is the point of why the king needs to be on d4. I suppose you could, if the king was on e4 in this position, you could go rook to b8 check, but it's a little bit different than that. So king takes b2 here, obviously, is a one game. Back in the game where he played king to e4, you might think that, hey, all that stuff we just looked at still holds true. But there's a very different point to this. On king to e4, the best for black here, he did not play this, he missed it as well, was rook to h8, exclamation mark. Why? Well, if you go with rook to c8, it looks like a normal winning idea, right? The problem comes in for white when black plays b2. The problem with the king on e4 is that black is going to promote with check. And there's no behind the scene check that white can do because the rook's covering the b8 square. And so if he promotes, black promotes with check and wins. This queen on d8 will be hanging. So after rook h8 in this variation, white has to try king to d3. But now, b2, rook check, king c6, rook takes b2, rook to h3, king d4, and king takes d7. It's a dead draw. The difference between king to e4 and king to d4 is quite vast. You know, it's move 57, and I'm almost certain that both players were in time pressure, so it's easy to make a mistake like that. But boy, we didn't dodge a bullet on that. We dodged a 1,000-pound bomb. b2 was played in the game, and now rook to b7 check, and whew, white's back to winning again. King to c6, and now mark promoted to a knight, and that's going to be enough to win after rook takes b2. Remlinger resigned at this point. Right, so Arizona's got 2 losses and a win. Our marquee game of this matchup is with Melikset Kahachian playing white against Mackenzie Molnar. And let's get into the opening here. We have a Nimzo castles, and it's a very stodgy line by Melikset, and c6. I've not seen this line too often, but it's a very interesting line with some good logic behind it. Looks kind of retarded, doesn't it, for your most standard opening play. White's got a lot of space, and he plays e4 to get more space. Now d5. This system has been seen a few times over the board. I looked around and dug through it a little bit. It's a very interesting idea that black has come up with here. Black is playing sort of a neo-hypermodern system where he's going to allow white's pawns to come forward, and then he's going to gradually undermine them. And that's what happens in the game. And indeed, it happens in almost every game that this line is played in. e5 knocks the knight back. And now c5. This is a novelty, but it's a pretty logical move. Knight to g3 has been seen before, and now usually f6 is played or a5. Similar to what we'll see in the game. So c5 doesn't really make a big difference on this. a5 is played, so this is the point. Black will now start chipping away at the white center. Bishop e3 was played, and now f6, as promised. My one concern in this opening line is this bishop on c8. And it'll be very interesting to see how Mackenzie manages to handle this problem child for black. f4 is played, g5. I didn't see that one coming, but it's perfectly playable, and it's probably the best shot. And I get the feeling after this that neither king is going to be safe for the rest of the game. g3 is played, and now a takes b4 might be better than what Mac played here, but still, g takes f4 as in the game is perfectly playable. And this is based on the understanding that the pawn must recapture on f4 and not a piece. For example, he plays bishop takes f4, black plays fe5, and now he has to play d takes e5. If he plays bishop takes, then bishop takes, pawn takes, then queen to g5, and we're hitting that pawn and going to win it, because if white tries to defend it with queen to d4, a takes b4 is just, well, it's decisive. Black is winning here. So he has to take with the pawn, and now knight to d7, and black's going to get that pawn. If queen d4 here, a b4 is still very effective in winning. And if bishop to h3, trying to hit that tender pawn there, well, you can just take with the knight, and your bishop on c8 is covering the e6 pawn. Black just won a pawn. And after e5 is played, he'll take care of his problem bishop as well. Right, so that's taking with the bishop, and taking with the knight is actually worse, because after fe5, de5, bishop takes e5, black's game is just starting to get freed up immediately, and everything's going to flow into the game, and a takes b4 is still a powerful move. So that's why Uscl played g takes f4. Now knight to g7, bishop to g2. I think that here I would have probably played rook to g1. Pressuring black's decision to open up the g file is really the way to go. But bishop to g2 is good as well. Pawn takes, d-pawn takes. Now it's a small and trivial point, but I think taking with the f-pawn might have been a little better. And now knight to f5, a nice post for the knight. Uscl wants to hang on to his bishop pair and drops the bishop back to f2. Pawn takes b4, pawn takes b4, rook takes a1, queen takes a1. And now I thought knight a6 was a good move here. Mac played b6. Let's look at knight a6 real quick. Why do I like this move? Well, white has to defend that pawn or push it, one of the two. If he goes queen to b2, then I think d4 is an interesting idea. And if knight to e4, knight takes b4 can be played, because if queen takes, bishop a5 is pinning the queen and winning it. So knight to a2 actually guards the pawn, which is necessary. b6, and now if knight takes d4, knight d4, queen takes d4, bishop takes d4, bc5, rook takes f4. And though it may not look it, I think black's pieces are a little more coordinated than white's are. And it's just a matter of getting the bishop out into the game on a6, and that can be done pretty quickly. It's still a pretty level game, but I would prefer black. So going back after b6, probably the safest move here is to castle. And then pawn takes, and knight takes. And black has solved all of his opening problems, and that bishop's going to be able to make it out. Yeah, I like black again here. There's chances for both sides. Oh, one more thing on the knight a6 line. If he tries b5, we go cb5, knight takes b5, we check, and king to d1. Well, here I think that black has again solved all of his opening problems. Alright. Mac played b6, and I'm sure he's looked into this line more than I have, so he's got a better feeling for it than I do. And I think white should play knight a4 here, but it's understandable that he'd want to get his king to safety, so Uscl castled, and now bishop a6. So much for the problem child. It's found its way into the game, and it's heading for greener pastures on c4. Rook to d1 was played, b takes c5 was played, and b takes c5. And now Mac plays queen to e8. Ready to activate the queen over on g6 or maybe h5. Okay, to take stock, both sides have a pair of bishops and a pair of knights, a rook and a queen. The same amount of pawns, but black has a passed d-pawn. At this caliber of play, you've got to say, well, that d-pawn doesn't really matter a whole lot. In essence, that's probably true. However, we've read many school books that showed us Capablanca winning, positions where he had a passed pawn and did so elegantly. We're going to see Mac do that here too. Uscl played bishop f3, King h8, king h1, getting the kings out of the way. Now bishop c4. Now a computer like Houdini is going to call this technically a level position, but again, given the passed d-pawn and the activity of the black pieces, I just find it easier for black to play. He's gotten his problem child bishop out from behind the pawn chain, and that means that white still has his bishop, his bad bishop, stuck behind the pawns, so that gives a little bit of edge to black here. Queen to a7, he realizes he has to play accurately and aggressively, so he does so. Knight to a6, taking advantage of the geometry of the position. Rook a1, queen to c8, knight to a4, queen to b8, queen takes, rook takes, knight to b6. And now Matt comes up with a good decision here. When you have a bishop pair facing a bishop pair, your advantage is not really all that great. But there are things about the bishop pair that are nice to have. One of those things is knowing when you can trade off one of your bishops to get a better position or a better game or more active play. And that's what Mac does here. So this is why I think this game is very informative. Because after bishop takes e2, bishop takes e2, well, it looks like on the surface that black's going to win a pawn, but not really. Because after knight takes c5, he can play knight takes d5, which is in fact what he played in the game. Though the alternative of bishop takes c5 might actually have been better, going down a pawn, and after bishop takes b6, rook to b1, bishop a7, rook takes, bishop takes, and king to g2, I think white has excellent drawing chances with the bishop pair versus bishop and knight. But I'm sure that white did not want to play for a draw here. So he thought that I better get the material equality back, and he did so right away with the desperado knight takes d5. Now Mac throws in a sharp in-between move here. He plays knight to b3. You definitely don't want to play e takes d5, because if bishop takes c5, bishop goes back and bishop to d3, and this is probably winning for white. Yeah, I'd have to say this is winning for white. That's why Mac flicked in the move knight to b3. Rook to a7, and now, since the knight on d5 is hanging, Mac can do a little desperado trick himself, which is a pretty cool way that this whole line of play went. And now, after pawn takes bishop, pawn takes knight, c takes knight. Alright, what do we have? In the long run, black has won a pawn, but now he's facing the bishop pair with a pair of knights. Maury Holland here, who prefers knights, would say, well, black has a one game. Whereas I, who likes the bishop pair, would say that the bishop pair is going to be able to draw this game with a good amount of ease. And I am correct. Maury is wrong. But in this case, Maury was proven right. Chess is a fun game, full of contradictions like that. So here, bishop to d3 was played. He would like to trade off a bishop for one of the knights to fracture up the pawns if possible. Knight d to b4 was played, and now he saw a chance to win a pawn, to get the material equality back, and I don't think it's quite the right thing to do here. It plays bishop takes d4. Now, we're going to see that losing this bishop comes into play later in the game. Because now, after knight takes d4, rook takes h7 check, king to g8, rook to h3. Alright, time to assess the position once again. After the trade of bishops, we see one big flaw in white's plan. This pawn on e5 is terribly weak, and it can be overly attacked. I mean, if the king can get to f4, the rook to e3 or e1, and the knight to c6, that pawn is going to fall. There's no way to stop it. However, white should be pretty easily able to keep the black king from coming to f5, which means that it can only be attacked by two pieces, and if he can get his king to f4 and his rook to the 5th rank to protect the pawn, or the e-file to protect it, the pawn's going to stay sturdy, but there's not going to be any winning chances for white. But that's his only hope. So they played on. We're at move 37 now. Mac played knight to c6, hitting the pawn right away, rook to e3, and now rook to b2 is played. You could also try king to f7, and if king comes forward, king to e7, just maintaining the eye on that pawn so the white bishop can't come around and hit it from behind. And if h4 here, rook to here, king to g3, rook to h5, this will round up the pawn, but white still maintains some drawing chances in this. And if he tries bishop to e2 here, then rook to g8 check, king over, rook here check, king up, and rook to f5 also rounds up the pawn. With winning chances for black, but with correct play, probably still a draw. Mac takes a different approach. He plays rook to b2 here, deciding to cut off the king. Bishop to e2, so the king can come out. King f7, h4. King g6 is possible. Mac played rook to b4. h5, rook h4 check, king to g2. Now, I didn't get to watch the games. Someone came over who has father issues. Alcohol and poor judgment were involved, so I was distracted from my duties as your commentator to watch the games live. But I'm assuming that the players were both in some sort of time pressure here, because I think if they had a lot of time left, Mac would have probably played knight to d4 here. Instead, he played d4, which is a gutsy move. It's an all or nothing move, and it pays off. Now, Milexet could draw the game here with rook to f3 check. Probably rook h3 draws too. But rook f3, and here's the idea. After king to e7, king to g3, well, we can take that pawn, but now rook to f7 check, king takes, bishop takes, and this is going to easily be a draw. No way for black to make headway in this position. And white's king is going to be dominant. So that line draws, but the one line that Milexet played, king to g3, actually loses. And g takes e3, king takes rook, and now knight to d4. And at this point, Milexet realized what had happened, and the pawn on e3 is more powerful than maybe he imagined, and he resigned. You know, he can move the bishop out of the way, but he's going to have to give it up. And this is a pretty easy, trivial win. I mean, he may have some shots at trying to get his king in here, but, you know, just bring your knight around to help you out. You know, there's still some cheeky stuff to play on in these kind of positions, so it's worth, you know, at least going down the road a little. And now knight f3, and he's got to protect the pawn. And now knight to here, and pawn comes up, king to g7. He's ready to try and infiltrate. You know, he wants to use that pawn on h7 as a decoy. If he can push it and promote, he can get his king to f6 and pick off black's pawn. But simply, knight to g6. Yeah, for an example, if you take the pawn here, king f6 is going to draw. Black will have to give up his knight for white's pawn, and that's a draw. But you just play knight to g6 here, so that h8 queen, we can take with the knight, and black wins. Again, you don't want to take with the king, because in this particular position it loses. Boom. And white has the opposition and wins. Alright, so, yeah, after knight to d4, you know, Milexet realized he's not going to be able to play that trivial stuff against Mac, and he resigned the game. So we ended up with another 2-2 tie, all decisive games. Great fighting spirit from the Scorpions. Pedram, I'm sorry about that game, man. That was, oh. I'm glad you didn't have a gun in your hand. At that point, you would have shot yourself or someone on your team. That was absolutely heartbreaking. And for Amanda, she just hasn't got her groove back yet. Things will get better. She's a very talented player, and that was a very unfortunate game. Now, week 5 contest, well, for the Scorpions, it's going to be on Wednesday, and we're going to have Mac Molnar playing white against Wesley So. That is going to be a fun matchup, and this is where Mac wants to get into. He wants to get into that cream of the crop, and I think that he's going to be able to do good against Wesley. You know, it's a faster time control, so it's anybody's game, but I think Mac is quite capable of drawing that game. If Wesley slips up, Mac can add another notch to his string of victories against strong players. On board 2, we have Li Kwang Liem. I have no idea who he is, and he's playing for the Archbishops, and he's going to have white against Alexei Zilger, and I have no idea who Alexei is. Welcome to the team, Alexei. I wish you well in the next matchup. Board 3, we have Robbie Adamson, and he's going up against Anna Sherovich. And Robbie seems to be in good form and in good spirits, especially since the Wildcats had a nice little Hail Mary at the end of the game to win it over Cal. He's going to be in good spirits. Basketball season's right around the corner. Good things. He's got to have a good attitude going into this. And he played a nice game on his last outing, so I look for Robbie to win. And then we have Matt Noble going up against, having the black pieces against Proleco. I have no idea who Proleco is. He's rated 1954. Matt, I think, will get his feet firmly under him with the black pieces, and I think that he'll actually score the victory here. Don't let me down, Matt. Don't let me down, buddy. So, my predictions. On board 2, I have no idea what's going on there. On board 1, I'm hoping Arizona can hold the draw. I think it's certainly within Mac's ability to do it. And I'm looking for wins on 3 and 4. Board 2, I have no idea how that's going to go. Alright, so you can tune into the games on ICC on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Time control for these games, just to let you know, is game in 75 with 30-second increment. You know, you're not going to end on a time decision very often, but it is a faster-paced game, and anything can happen. So tune in if you can for the Arizona versus St. Louis matchup this coming Wednesday. That is the 24th of September. All right, folks, until next time.